Straight to our top story, Britain's Monarch Airlines has ceased operations with immediate effect, leaving 110,000 customers stranded overseas and about 300,000 future bookings cancelled. UK's Civil Aviation Authority confirmed that Monarch Airlines will not operate anymore. Monarch Airlines made the announcement on Twitter, saying that airline has suspended flights. UK government has asked Civil Aviation Authority to charter more than 30 aircraft to bring back Monarch Airline customers who are currently overseas. Monarch is UK's largest ever airline to enter administration. Government has begun the biggest ever peacetime operation, which is repatriation. It is an effort to return the affected passengers. Monarch said it was talking to potential partners after a report that part of its short-haul network should be sold. Tough competition in the airline sector has been putting pressure on weaker European carriers and driving consolidation. And thousands of anti-Brexit protesters have marched to ruling Conservative Party's 4-day annual conference demanding Britain to stay in European Union. Protesters in Manchester called on Prime Minister Theresa May to embrace closer ties with Europe. In another demonstration, protesters demanded May's resignation as well.
Well, the mood out of, the stuff that comes out of Downing Street is relentlessly depressing. I can't help but agree. But we've got to resist it. Sometimes you feel like what you're doing is insignificant, but it's very important that you do it. It's important. You've got to try.
The UK voted 52 to 48% in the 2016 referendum to exit the European Union. However, negotiations with Brussels progressed slowly as country remains divided over outcome of Brexit. Among the protesters were the Conservative Party's members who claimed that they did not get an opportunity to express their opinions about Brexit in the party's meetings. Tory member John Stevens said that Brexit is going to do a tremendous damage to the City of London and its financial services, and that this has to be stopped.
I think that we need to rethink Brexit completely. It's going to be a disaster if we leave the European Union. Disaster above all strategically, and Brexit is going to do tremendous damage, in my view, to the City of London and our financial services, and that's why we have to stop it.
We would like in this group to remain members of the EU and remain members of the single market and remain members of the customs union, but it's all a spectrum of opinion, and we hope that the party will shift in our direction.
There were 3 large demonstrations in Manchester on the first day of Conservative conference as police dispatched thousands of officers to the protest site. Some small skirmishes were reported between protesters and the police. According to reports, Tory membership has shrunk by 25% after Brexit referendum, while a 4-fold Labour membership has exceeded by 600,000 last week.
It's a broadly based movement. The Lib Dems are absolutely clear that we need to resist very damaging Brexit, but we have allies, and I think the mood in the country will change. That's why we want the outcome of the negotiation to be put to a vote. So first referendum on the facts.
And former Uber CEO Travis Kalanick has named 2 new directors without consulting company's new leader or other existing board members. Kalanick said in an announcement that he appointed Ursula Burns, Xerox Corp's former CEO, and John Thain, the ex-Merrill Lynch CEO, to Startups board. Uber challenged the appointments, calling them a complete surprise. The former CEO is defending himself against a lawsuit brought by Uber's largest shareholders, Benchmark, over his authority to fill the 2 board seats. Kalanick says he controls 3 of company's 11 board seats. Benchmark is suing Kalanick for fraud and has asked him to relinquish control of both positions. The suit is in private arbitration. Kalanick resigned as CEO on June 20 after Benchmark and a group of early investors asked him to step down. Uber's board has been rife with infighting and underwent a contentious process to select former Expedia CEO as its new chief. Uber expressed concern at Kalanick's announcement as well. So former Uber CEO Travis Kalanick has named 2 directors named without consulting board. Kalanick has asserted right to pick directors. That is also bone of contention. And Uber's appointment is a complete surprise. That's what Uber has said. Ursula Burns, Xerox former CEO, has been appointed as director. And John Thain, ex-Merrill Lynch CEO, has also been named among directors. And today is a special day for India. For the first time, US has started delivering its crude to India, and the first ship containing US crude has landed and touched Indian shores at Paradip, Orissa. We find out whether that will benefit Indians or not. Take a look at the story. In a big shift from usual Gulf sellers, India has started buying crude oil from US now. Government-owned Indian Oil Corporation had booked the first US cargo in July, and it has touched Indian shores today. The ship carrying 1.6 million barrels of US crude has reached Paradip in Orissa. Also buying US crude is coming at a discount of $2 per barrel for India as compared to buying it from Gulf nations. But these savings will reach Indian consumers only if oil refiners decide to bring down petrol or diesel prices in India and make them cheaper for Indians. As India has a free regime for fuel prices, it is the oil refiners, including Indian Oil Corporation, Bharat Petroleum Corporation and Hindustan Petroleum, that decide on the fuel prices. Indian Oil Corporation and Bharat Petroleum have committed to buy 8 shiploads of US oil by March next year. Indian government has encouraged government-controlled refiners to buy US and Canadian crude from the US Gulf Coast as it looks at cheaper alternatives that have emerged due to global supply glut. India is the world's third largest oil importer, and with the arrival of crude, it joins Asian countries like South Korea, Japan and China to buy US crude. Even after including the shipping cost, buying US crude is cost competitive to Indian refiners now. Bureau Report, WION. Moving to South Korea, where the exports have surged to record last month in the latest sign that stronger global trade is helping to underpin growing momentum for the global economy. The nation's shipments abroad rose for an 11th month in September, driven by overseas demand for steel, semiconductors and petrochemical products. Exports jumped 35% from a year earlier. The Trade Ministry said the median estimate of economists was for a surge of 25%. Imports gained 21.7% versus expectations for them to advance 20.6%. The trade surplus was $13.8 billion. Also a record month-on-month growth in exports was the most since January 2011. The better-than-expected data came after China announced its factory gauge has hit a 5-year high. The results also showed that South Korea's economy is demonstrating resilience even as war of words between US President Trump and North Korean leader has heightened tensions on peninsula. Exports have surged almost in 13 major categories. The Trade Ministry said South Korea's economy has improved slightly in some regions in the third quarter, with domestic consumption driven by positive sentiment and government's job creation policy. So South Korea's exports have surged to record thanks to steel, semiconductors that are behind export surge. And South Korea's shipments have climbed for 11th month in a row. The export surge was steepest monthly jump since 2011, so it has come after a gap of 6 years. Trade Ministry in South Korea expects exports growth could slow down going forward. The imports too gained 21.7% versus expectations of 20.6%. And South Korea has registered a trade surplus of $13.8 billion as well. Moving to China, where China Central Bank PBOC has said it will maintain prudent and neutral monetary policy and use multiple monetary tools to keep liquidity basically stable. The People's Bank of China, or PBOC, will continue with interest rate and exchange rate reform while keeping the yuan basically stable. The bank said in comments on its website following a quarterly meeting of its Monetary Policy Committee. The PBOC, or People Bank of China, said it will optimize financing and credit structure by promoting direct financing in line with requirements of supply-side structure reforms. It will also continue to deepen reform of financial system, improve operating efficiency in the financial sector to better serve the real economy while strengthening risk management. The country will further advance market-based interest rate reforms and seek improvements in RMB exchange rate formation mechanism to keep the rate basically stable at an appropriate and balanced level. China's economy maintains steady growth but is confronting with a complex economic situation, according to the statement. And China will maintain prudent neutral monetary policy. PBOC has said that. PBOC is People Republic of China. PBOC will try to keep yuan stable. That's what has been said by PBOC. China's economy has maintained a steady growth path. And an initial public offering or IPO by Lyft will give investors a way to jump into self-driving cars, although the ride services company and rival Uber Technologies may have to wait years before sending a driverless robotaxi to a customer. And Lyft, we can say that the ride-hailing company's IPO has given a boost to GIF. And we can overall say that Lyft was valued at around $7.5 billion. But rival Uber is valued at $68 billion. And experts say IPO would give Lyft much needed financial muscle to deal with larger rivals such as Uber and will also give it an upper hand in scouting and developing new technologies. Reports earlier said San Francisco-based Lyft is close to hiring an IPO advisory firm as a first concrete step toward becoming publicly listed. Lyft would establish a public valuation for ride services startups that has been elusive. A ride services IPO tests the belief of many auto industry insiders that individual auto ownership will wane as people will sell their cars and rely only on mobility services.
I've never gone. It's all gravel.
And the maker of hit mobile game Angry Birds, Rovio, will look to buy up other players in the gaming industry following its successful listing last week. The Finnish company's shares got off to a flying start on their stock market debut, trading up as much as 7% from their initial public offering price of around $14 per share. So Rovio is flying high. Rovio is the parent company of Angry Birds. It has actually planning to swoop on rivals. It's planning to acquire some rivals. The shares of Rovio got off to a flying start post-listing. And Rovio shares are trading up around 7% since its listing last Friday. Rovio has more muscle to do deal in gaming business. So experts say Rovio now has more muscle power to deals in gaming sector, which is believed to be ripe for consolidation. Analysts have long urged Rovio to do more to reduce its reliance on Angry Birds franchise. Angry Bird game has been downloaded around 3 billion times, and after going through a rough phase, earlier Rovio fortunes are on a recovery path after success of Angry Birds movie. And connecting New Delhi to two more Afghan cities, Afghan airline Kam Air will launch its first direct service to Delhi. The flight will be operated from Afghan city of Mazar-e-Sharif to India's national capital. Another direct flight from Herat to Delhi will also be launched. The inaugural flight was seen off today from Maulana Jalaluddin Balkhi Airport in Mazar-e-Sharif for Indira Gandhi International Airport, Delhi at 10:30 a.m. Kam Air is privately owned airline by the Kamgar Group, and it will operate 2 flights a week from Mazar on Monday and Wednesday and from Herat on Friday and Tuesday. A new flight has been started as there was a demand for a direct flight to Delhi from Mazar from visa seekers for long, and Afghan people in the northern provinces who travel to India for medical treatment will benefit the most. Flights from India to Afghanistan are currently operated by Air India, SpiceJet and Fly Dubai as well. and the federal authorities in the US have uncovered a massive fraud operation that was operating out of call centers in India. Authorities say the network of criminals in India managed to steal over $1 billion around the world, and their targets were often vulnerable Indians living in America. WION's Andy Rosgan has a look at how the operation was exposed in a small community in US.
It started about 3 years ago here in the Chicago suburb of Naperville. Local police were getting a few calls from Indians living in the area who said they had been scammed by a call center in India. The callers pretended to be from America's Internal Revenue Service, the IRS, and told the victims to pay taxes or be jailed. Or the callers would pretend to be from the Customs and Immigration Service and say the victims would be deported if they didn't pay hundreds or thousands of dollars.
They went ahead and did it immediately, and many times they didn't know better and they were being told to do it right now as they were on the phone, and many of the victims did that.
Then the victims were told to get to a big grocery store like Walmart to buy gift cards. Specifically, they were told to buy these kinds of gift cards, prepaid debit cards called green dot cards. Then, after the victims put money onto the cards, they were instructed to tell the Indian callers the PIN numbers from those cards. From there, members of the scam in the United States, called runners, managed to move the funds into various bank accounts and money orders, and the runners would get their cut too.
It is terrible.
Krishna Bansal heads the Indian Community Outreach Center in Naperville. He also got several threatening calls from that Indian call center.
I have tried getting into a conversation with these guys to understand why and what they're doing, and then finally when they realized that I know what is going on, they backed off completely. And they in fact started talking to me in Hindi and Gujarati.
Bansal believes the Indian call centers have access to a database of Indians living in America and know exactly how to scare them and touch an emotional nerve. And the victims he's talked with feel ashamed for falling for it.
Some of these people are not very well-to-do offer. They don't have a lot of savings. They have lost all their savings. And you can imagine, that money was kept for something else. That money was for some kids' education.
At the Naperville Police Department, investigators eventually started to connect the dots with other reports of Indian call center scams around America. The investigation took years, but federal authorities determined that the Indian call center that was harassing Naperville was based in Ahmedabad. And in the last few months, authorities have rounded up about 60 suspects, and several of them have already pleaded guilty. About a dozen Naperville residents lost roughly $88,000 in the scam, but the worldwide theft is estimated at over $1 billion.
This investigation made a significant impact, and this type of scam has slowed down dramatically. So we have made a dent.
Krishna Bansal says he's helping set up a series of community meetings for Indians to teach them how to avoid phone scams in the future. And as for those who already fell prey, well, authorities say they might be able to get some of their money back, but it could take years. Andy Rosgan in Chicago for WION.
And IBM are international business machines that dominated early decades of computing with inventions like the mainframe and floppy disk. Its offices and factories stretched from upstate New York to Silicon Valley. They were hubs of American innovation long before Microsoft or Google came along. But over the last decade, IBM has shifted its center of gravity halfway around the world to India, making it a high-tech example of globalization and its strengths that the Trump administration has rallied against. The company now employs 130,000 people in India, about one-third of its total workforce and more than in any other country. Their work span entire gamut of IBM's businesses, from managing computing need of global giants like AT&T and Shell to performing cutting-edge research in fields like visual search, artificial intelligence and computer vision for self-driving cars. And not a good news for India, where rainfall in India's annual monsoon season was below average and less than forecast, with some crop-growing central and northern states receiving less rain than needed The National Weather Office has said monsoon rains were 95% of long-term average compared with Indian Meteorological Department or IMD's forecast of 98%, marking the fourth straight year in which IMD has overestimated likely rainfall. The monsoon, which delivers about 70% of India's annual rainfall, is critical for the farm sector that accounts for about 15% of India's $2 trillion economy and employs more than half of country's 1.3 billion people. India's rainfall was below average mostly because of low rainfall in the oilseeds and pulses growing central state of Madhya Pradesh and in the rice growing northern states of Haryana and Punjab. While rice output is expected to be down 2% compared with last year due to better irrigation in the rain deficient northern states, soybean output could fall about 8%. And India has experienced monsoon rainfall which was below average. Central northern states, they did not receive as much rainfall as was expected. Indian Meteorological Department or IMD forecast of 98% rainfall. Monsoon delivers about 70% of India's overall irrigation capacity, and monsoon is critical for farm output. Indian farm sector accounts for about 15% of $2 trillion economy, and the sector employs more than half of country's 1.3 billion people. And monsoon is less than forecast. IMD has said that. IMD is Indian Meteorological Department, and Indian monsoon rainfall has been below average. Monsoon has delivered about 70% of India's annual rainfall.